Hello everyone, I'm Bill Hammond and I actually paid to see this, and welcome back to the 2026 Oscar Blitz, where I break down every category and every nominee at the 98th Academy Awards. This week is one of the most niche technical categories of the lot, film editing. It's also one that I look forward to every year because I've spent more than a decade of my life as a professional editor, and I started learning the craft as a teenager. I prefer writing as a creative outlet, but I've always taken a shine to editing as a tool for visual storytelling, dating all the way back to my high school days on VHS tape decks, composing montage projects one shot at a time over the course of several weeks. There's a lot of skill and finesse that goes into the art and science of editing, and our five nominees today all exemplify that in some way. So let's get to it. F1, Stephen Mirion. I make no secret that I didn't like F1 for a lot of reasons, but the technical elements are its one true strength, especially the editing. The problem is the influence of others interfering with the process to make you notice the cool stuff, but lament the execution. During the racing sequences, Mirion and his team stitched together some really compelling and intense scenes, particularly as cars pass each other and crash. When we focus on that, the film ranks up there with the likes of Ford vs. Ferrari, Days of Thunder, and Rush. Unfortunately, the overall direction is so slapdash that we never really understand the geography of each track. All we get is a brief on-screen graphic of the track's shape and the occasional animation updating the position standings. For all the exposition that the announcers dump on us regarding rules and strategy in a Formula One Grand Prix, we never truly understand the physics of navigating a chicane or the actual science behind things like tire pressure and temperature. As such, the individual shot sequences of the race look awesome, but they're ultimately meaningless. That's the fault of the director, not the editor. Also the director's fault, the fact that outside the races, the movie is boring as hell, and clocks in at an intolerable 2.5 hours. The editor can only trim the fat so much, and he often must acquiesce to the demands of those above him. Such is the case here. Marty Supreme, Ronald Bronstein, and Josh Safdie. Marty Supreme suffers from some of the same issues as F1, but this time you can blame the editors because they're also the writers and directors. On the one hand, Safdie and Bronstein know exactly what they want out of the story and how they want it paced. On the other, the pace is kinda crappy. Just like with F1, the scenes of the table tennis are exciting, more than they have any right to be, and that's to be lauded. But outside of that, when we're watching Marty trying to con someone for cash for the 47th time, it just feels repetitive and superfluous. I enjoyed this movie, mostly for the sporting scenes and Timothée Chalamet's very against-type performance, but the other elements are somewhat lacking. The editing is tight when it matters most. In fact, if you look closely, you can see the exact frame where a ping pong ball in flight turns from a practical prop into a digital asset. That can be considered good or bad depending on your taste. To me, it's cool because my eye has been trained for over 20 years to notice that stuff. But otherwise, it looks fairly seamless. On the whole, though, this is a case where the technical editing is superb, but the story editing leaves you wanting. One Battle After Another, Andy Jurgensen. This is a case where story editing takes more of a front seat than the technical, but both sides of the equation are quite strong. One Battle After Another front-loads a lot of information about the French 75 rebels, to the point that the entire first act plays like an extended montage, but Jurgensen does make sure we spend enough time at each stop along the backstory's path to get the information we need to care about the characters down the line. Once the main plot gets going, however, Jurgensen has a delicate task to perform. He has to balance two entirely separate stories, going back and forth to each other at the appropriate time so that we don't lose interest in either, nor do we forget the details about what's going on. Then, within each subplot, he has to edit in a way that jives with its tone. For those involving Chase Infinity and Sean Penn, the order of the day is slow, deliberate shot selections with minimal cuts to help the weight of each moment hit the viewer. For Leonardo DiCaprio and Benicio del Toro, things have to be far more fast-paced, with quick cuts to match the intensity of the action. It all culminates with an expert mix of the two styles during the final chase sequence, aided by some spectacular cinematography. The discipline to hold on the shot long enough to see the pursuing vehicle slowly pop up from the other side of a hill makes for some amazing suspense, and it's a huge credit to Jurgensen and his team that they were able to pull this off. Sentimental Value, Olivier Bouga-Coutet. Without high-octane action scenes or fancy special effects, the edit job here is all about setting mood and conveying emotion from scene to scene. The actual story of Sentimental Value vacillates between its four lead characters, and a balance has to be maintained to make sure we all keep proper tabs on everyone's plot beats. This is done through some clever timing tricks as the film progresses. For Renata Reinsby's Nora and Stellan Skarsgård's Gustav, this means longer takes and single shot sequences that illustrate the depths of their emotional journeys and the distance they are from one another in both professional and personal terms. There are quite a few times when, even as they're talking to each other, the scene doesn't cut. We linger on Reinsby's face as Skarsgård talks off camera because her reaction and processing matters far more than seeing the actor's lips move. For Elle Fanning, being the American outsider and a product of modern trends, a lot of her shots are quicker and punchier, as if her screen time amounts to an earnest TikTok video at times. For Agnes, who often serves as the net between Nora and Gustav, her shots are balanced on their pacing, giving you enough time to observe her viewpoint while focus continually shifts. Overall, it's the opposite of being the proverbial fly on the wall. The name of the game here is intimacy. We want to be as close to these characters as possible, and the editing goes a long way towards creating that effect. Sinners, Michael P. Shawver. Of all the nominees, you could argue that Sinners is the most traditionally edited. A lot of the touches aren't always apparent, but the film maintains a brisk pace where we never hold on any one moment for too long. The real accomplishment here is twofold. The first is in maintaining the geography of its large ensemble cast. What I mean by this is that there are a lot of moving parts when it comes to the characters. First, we have to gather our main group to work at the juke joint, and we have to introduce Remick and the vampires, and get them all to the same place for the main action to unfold. Then, once the party/slaughter begins, Shawver and his team have to make sure that whenever we cut to someone, they're in the proper and logical spot so that we in the audience never lose track of who's who and where. This gets especially complicated during the final fight, and beautifully sets up the final twist in the mid-credits scene. The second is the most forward-facing, and that's Smoke and Stack. See, modern editing involves a fair amount of rudimentary visual effects. It's not nearly to the level of dedicated CGI and practical effects like you'd see in, say, an Avatar movie, but it is a skill set editors are equipped with for more simple, air quotes, uses. The task is a constant one, and that's making sure that both versions of Michael B. Jordan look natural in the scenes they share. This involves combining shots where they were filmed from different angles, key effects for when they exchange items like cigarettes, inserting one or both of them into large group shots where it would be impractical and extremely difficult to have everyone else move in the exact same manner between takes, and cut around stand-ins for close-up shots. This is a very intricate process because if the existence of the twins looks in any way artificial, the whole viewing experience falls apart. So, with all that in mind, and my editor brain going into overdrive, here's how I rank the nominees. In 5th place is F1. There are some good elements here, but only in the racing scenes, and that only makes up about 1/4 of the torturous runtime. 4th place goes to Sentimental Value, 3rd to Marty Supreme, then it's a big jump to 2nd place and Sinners, and finally, at number 1, if I had an actual say, it's One Battle After Another. There are just so many gorgeous techniques on display throughout this film, and it takes a monumental effort to make it all feel seamless. That's where I stand, but how about you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. That's it for this week, but keep it locked on actuallypaid.com for full coverage of the Blitz in print and video form, and I'll be back next week for one more breakdown, as I do every year, for Best Picture. Until then, everyone, I'm Bill Hammond. I actually paid to see this.
This is the BTRP Media Network.